Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here and want to thank those of you that are coming back, that come back month after month to learn about cybersecurity and compliance topics. And if you're new, welcome. Hopefully, you'll get a chance to take advantage of these things that we do every month. And if you signed up, you should have gotten an email yesterday from one of us on the team, asking you if you have some questions for us today. Some of you responded, and we put those down, and we'll bring those up during the webinar. And if you do have questions as we go through this, please ask them. We want this to be extremely interactive. And as soon as this is over with, you'll get another email asking how we did. And so rate us from 1 to 10. That feedback is really, really important to us. So let's go ahead and get this thing kicked off. Let's look at the agenda today. So we'll talk to you about some webinars that are coming up. We'll do some introductions to us, the panelists. And then we're really going to, do a deep dive into what is ISO, and then also some of the trends around the world. You see there's a breaking news. There's some information that we've just learned that we want to share with you about ISO, and then ISO 27001. And then we'll just get into the meat of, the steps it takes to get ISO certified. And then we'll take some questions at the end, but also throughout we'll be taking questions as well. The idea is this is extremely interactive. So let's go to the next slide. So again, webinars coming up, September 21st, it'll be about HITRUST. October 18th, it'll be about our managed compliance offering. More details on both of those to come out. And you can always see our webinars online at 360advanced.com. All right, here's the fun part. Let's get going. So we'll meet the panelists today. My name is Carlos Guerrero. I've been here a couple years, senior compliance executive, help on the business development side of things, and MC these webinars. And we have two experts with us today. Chris Goodzak, who's a practice director here at 360 Advanced, and Eric Ratcliffe, director of compliance strategy. Both have been with the organization a long time. So I'll just let them both introduce themselves, and then we'll get going. Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. So Chris Goodzak again, practice director with 360 Advanced. Been with the firm for 7 years now, and kind of an interesting background that I have. At least that's what I've been told. Previously was with Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office for 7 years as a law enforcement deputy, and made the switch into the accounting world. And here we are today talking about ISO.
Most certainly. Eric?
Yeah, Eric Ratcliffe, Director of Compliance Strategy. I believe it's almost 14 years now. I've been with 360 Advanced. Yep, and it's kind of interesting how the times have changed. When I first started, 14 years ago, most organizations still had a closet with servers in it. And, it really, you think about it, in 14 years, it doesn't seem like a long time, but in the technology and the compliance world, it's very significant how things have changed. So yeah, looking forward to talking a little bit about this, sharing our experiences. And one thing I'll say about even Carlos and I, we do handle a lot of the sales and inquiries, but we really try to take a strategic approach to this because a lot of you are throwing a lot of different standards or requests, demands from your customers. So, if you ever need any help kind of demystifying those, just connect with us.
Exactly right, Eric. No, appreciate that. So who is 360 Advanced? I'm just going to share real quickly a high-level overview so you get what I call kind of the flavor of the firm. So you know who we are, because I think these type of, knowing this matters. If you're going to choose a partner in this space, it's really nice to know, what type of firm you're dealing with. We're about 100 people, been around for 15 plus years or so. We're still, privately held, and at the moment, and what that means to us is that we can really focus, a little bit more on client outcomes and spend time, being that partner like Eric was, talking about. And so on the next slide, I'll share with you the type of services that we offer. If it's cybersecurity compliance, think of us. So, the typical ones are, the ISO 27001, SOC 1, SOC 2, HITRUST, PCI, We do lots of risk assessments, whether they be NIST or HIPAA. We have a really strong penetration testing group. And then we also have an outsourced compliance component of our business where called 360 Cyber Comply, where we actually get on the other side of the table with folks and help guide them along the compliance journey in sort of a fractional or outsourced capacity. So it just all comes back to, we really value relationships and communication, like Eric said. And if you get a chance to talk with us, hopefully you'll experience that. So let's go on and get this thing fired up in terms of the webinar. So what is ISO? I mean, it's a really good question and a good place to start. Eric, you put together the slide, and from your research and being on our committee here with ISO, I mean, what would you share with folks? What do you think is the most important?
Well, don't want to sit here and read slide by slide, but I think what's fascinating about some of the information on this particular slide is how relevant this is still today. And this took place back in 1947, is when a group of individuals and countries, they basically just got together and said, hey, how can we help facilitate a better trade between countries, make it more dependable? One thing in the second bullet there, I added the word secure. And it says, how can you work through large economies and you make it a smooth and secure exchange of goods and services. So that's why I said it's quite interesting how relevant it is today. Back then it was more about a smooth transaction. Now it's smooth and secure. So that's really the big thing. I just find it, how it's maintained its relevancy since 1947. It's quite impressive.
Well, Chris, this idea of assurance, or having some sort of rules of the road in order for people to have, be able to trust one another. I mean, we're seeing compliance really evolve right now, right in front of us. But I mean, this is nothing, nothing new in a lot of ways, right? Folks have been, wanting to have some sort of assurance that who they're doing business with, is they're good partners, for a while, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, and therein lies the reason for this need, right? The standardization over, the world, really, in this case. So having that benchmark, a like standard for a like standard that can be applied within multiple different organizations and many different industries.
Yeah, most certainly. Let's go ahead and get to the next slide. We'll dig a little bit further into this. So, Eric, again, you put together this slide. I think there's some interesting information here. I'm sure you have a couple things that you'd like to call out.
Sure. Again, the WHO, it's the International Organization for Standardization. And don't think of ISO as just information security. A lot of us, and the subject today is really around 27001. But there's many different flavors of ISO, from manufacturing to quality control to, it just goes on and on. There's, I don't even know how many there are. But it's independent, it's non-governmental. And again, the big one is it's an international organization, and it's really created to benefit all sizes of businesses. So it really doesn't matter the industry that you're in. It doesn't matter the size of an organization that you are. We have organizations with 5 employees that have implemented ISO into their environment. We've got clients that have 30,000 employees that are also doing it. So size really doesn't matter. So an interesting thing, there's 169 member countries. These are not individuals, they're not states, they're not organizations, they're actually countries. And that goes back to showing how widely accepted this is from a global perspective. I mentioned it was, founded in 1947. And, those are just some of the key points on why we feel this is in kind of the subject that we're going to talk about, is why this is a strategic play if you're looking to expand outside of the US, because of really the way it was formed, the way it's managed today.
Oh, that's great. And I think that goes nicely into the next slide, actually. So if you want to move over here. And so, I mean, and then we have a graph after this, which will really shed some light on this. But the idea that there's a 65% increase year over year, for 27001 certifications in the United States alone. I mean, what are some of the reasons for that you're seeing? I mean, either one of you can take that.
Yeah, some of this information comes, and you'll see at the bottom of this particular slide. It's called the ISO survey, and I believe if you just were to search the ISO survey, you'll find a lot of really interesting information. And when I saw that statistic, the survey did not give any reason why they felt that the U.S. had, really been so much higher than the rest of the world. I took it and started thinking about some of our incoming traffic we get from inquiries on our clients, prospects. And then I thought, well, I wonder what the SaaS market looks like worldwide. And what I found is that there, in 2023, it's estimated there are 30,000 SaaS companies. Here's the interesting one. This is why I think it ties to the large increase the U.S. has had. It said that approximately 70% of these SaaS companies are based in the U.S. So I think it's been the explosion of SaaS companies coming up. And, with a SaaS organization, you're really not limited to, territories. So I really think it's just because of the SaaS explosion that we're seeing is why the U.S. is outpacing a lot of other countries.
Makes a lot of sense. I did get a question here, and Chris, I'll throw this one to you. So someone from the audience just kind of generically asked about, 27701, the privacy version of this. Like how often do you see those in tandem? I mean, could you shed any color on what that is?
Yeah, and I don't know. First, we're here to authenticate, right? So I'll hit on the, why the expansion and why ISO first, if that's okay.
Oh, totally fine.
And one thing that I was thinking about actually just this morning, prepping for this, is thinking about COVID, what that did to everybody, putting people at home, away from one another, really not able to connect as easily as we have, and that really kickstarted our use of platforms like these and really a more wide acceptance to a platform like this, right? And not having to be face to face and shake hands as much anymore. So, with that, we're seeing companies and industries expanding globally, diversification, right? If you're in multiple markets instead of just one, that's a good thing, right? You're diversifying that risk. And then even to your point, Eric, about the SaaS companies, it's a competitive thing as well. So if I'm based in the US, but I'm competing now against the world, everybody is seeing ISO as a standard that's widely accepted, of course. I have a SOC 2, well, and we're going to talk about this as well, not to reveal too much, but the overlap between different standards and really what is it going to take to get that so then that company can be on a level playing field with their competition. So I think that could be a lot to it. Obviously just a theory at this point, unproven, but that's my take. Now, to your point about 27701 versus 27001, really 27701 is designed to be bolted onto a 27001 certificate. And really the reason why I say that is how the standard is written. It's written from the perspective of what modifications would you need to make to your 27001 program in order to implement 27701, right, for privacy. I guess we failed to mention exactly what it was for. But yeah, that's the privacy information management system, 27701.
No, that's perfect. No, that answers the question for that person, I'm sure. Well, let's go ahead and then take it to the next slide just to kind of make sure that we keep things moving. I think, Eric, this is just a great slide to demonstrate that, a lot of, the ISO 27001 is within that information technology space. I'm sure that would kind of line up with, the growth of SaaS and as Chris mentioned, just being, interconnected.
Yeah, that didn't surprise me, right? Information technology is the main reason organizations do this. And one thing to put this in perspective is when you see, I thought 58,000, that seemed a little low to me when you're thinking about a global standard. But keep in mind, that is certifications. And I know that we have had questions on, well, could we do ISO without a certification? The answer is absolutely. It is a standard that is well accepted. It's It's been maintained. There's a new version that's coming out, which we'll talk to in a little bit. So even though only 58,000 have issued certifications, doesn't mean that several 100,000, if not millions of organizations utilize ISO as a way to strengthen their security.
Perfectly, makes perfect sense. And I think that we do get those questions, and I have one here that I'll probably ask a little bit later that kind of ties into that. So we'll kind of put a pin in it just to make sure we get through the content. But I think that's a great point. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. And Eric, this is the slide, right, that shows the difference, in where the U.S. is compared to other countries, and to see that expansion at such a rate, you really feel like, that if you looked at this in a year or two, that this would look, quite a bit different.
Yeah, the new it'd be the 2022 survey should be coming out next month. At least that's what is anticipated. I'm looking forward to seeing, did we move up on the pie chart here from the U.S. perspective? I would imagine we absolutely will, again, because of the explosion of SaaS companies. Also, when you think about total certs, this is this is 27,001 specifically. But to give you an idea how large ISO is with all of their different certifications, it's approximately 2 million total certifications.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a big number. And ISO 27001 is the 4th largest of all ISO standards. So it just makes sense, right? Information security is just, it's extremely important when you're trying to have that trusted handshake when you're doing business with another organization.
Most certainly. And so where would people be able to find that ISO survey? Like where is that? And even if you just kind of, where could people search for that?
I believe if you just Google the ISO survey, you'll find it. And it's really interesting the way it's laid out. There are tabs for each different standard. You can drill down into each country. It talks about the different sectors that are obtaining certification. So it is pretty interesting.
No, that's super cool. Yep. Let's move on. Just again, make sure that we keep rolling. Now here's the the breaking news as we put it here. And Eric, I know you have a business you're working with where this was pertinent. You've been working closely with Chris, and so I'll just kind of give you guys a chance to have some dialogue around why, explain what this is and why it's important for businesses to be paying attention to.
Yeah, certainly. So first of all, and I know we covered this in a webinar we did a couple months ago, but there is a new revision coming out. In fact, it is out now. It was 27,001, and it was the 2013 revision. We are now working off of 2022. So in here, there are some timelines of when we, as a certification body, can issue up to a certain date against 2013. What has happened is there has been an extension that was recently distributed, and we now can issue under the 2013 revision up until April 30th of 2024. So the example that we were going to talk about was, well, why wouldn't you go right into 2022 today? And I would say, and Chris, I think you would agree, I believe that is what everyone should be doing, because you're gonna find that you're gonna get caught in a change to where you may have to fast forward one of your surveillance audits a couple years from now to stay in compliance with these timelines. But in this particular case, this organization had spent a lot of money and time over the last year and a half preparing their organization under 2013. Their timeline was drug out. They had a lot of remediation to do, and now they have a deadline of completing this by the end of the year. So at this point, it's kind of hard to go and now say, hey, now let's look at 2022. So with that one, it's really good. They're able to take advantage of this extension because they have spent a lot of time working and implementing under 2013. So, this does help them. So.
And I can just kind of add on to that. And I just think about, well, what's the use case or relevancy of this information? If you're new to 27001, considering it, haven't started a program, probably not relevant, right? Go straight for 2022. If you've started the process, haven't wrapped it up yet, highly recommend considering making the tweaks necessary to be certified under that 2022 standard. Of course, it takes effort, and I'll oversimplify it, and it's not that much, but it's a few tweaks to various clauses, a few things that were merged, different controls. There's only a couple new controls, and some were eliminated. So if you haven't been certified yet, it makes sense, and that use case that Eric, you were explaining, makes sense, right? The big push, there could be a large organization, lots of politics in play, who knows, right? They can get certified under the 2013 standard, but the fun doesn't stop there. You have to then work to transition onto that 2022 standard. So just important that that's added to the task list.
That's great. And we did get a question that pertains to this, and we were talking about it in the green room a little bit, but the question was, moving from 2013 into 2022, are there any quote unquote automated ways to update the new standard? Now, we don't know exactly what they mean by this, but I think it's at least a good question for a discussion, or to kind of add some color or thoughts around it. And Chris, you were mentioning something, earlier, like how would you answer that if you saw that question come across your desk?
Sure, is probably what I would say, with the asterisk, but with ISO, sure, it is one standard, right? And there are required clauses and controls in there that you have to implement. But how you choose to implement those is going to vary from one organization to the next, an infinite number of possibilities. So I guess to say in the most literal terms of that question, is there an automated way to make this transition? No. If you have some method of automation and a highly more technical mind than mine, probably, I bet you somebody could figure that out, and program in some logic and figure out a way to at least identify the areas that you're maintaining your program. So
cool.
Possibilities are endless, right? But probably not. This is a manual thing because it's going to be so specific to any one organization.
I thought you were going to say it depends, but okay. That's also the other.
I stay away from that as much as I can.
Good move. All right, let's head to the next one. All right, this is where we start, get a little bit into the nitty gritty, into the trenches. And so leveraging different standards, right? I mean, we all know of organizations that we work with who have integrated compliance projects or request, their clients are asking them for multiple things. So, the questions that come into us, especially us, Eric, in the early days, when we're having conversations with people, how do I tie all this stuff together, right? And so I think it's a good launching place to talk about the two obvious ones, which is SOC 2, which we see a lot of here in the US, of course, and the 27001 from ISO. So, I don't really know who to hand it to. So, I'll let you guys jump on who would like to take the conversation, but I think a little dialogue around this would be helpful.
I'll start if you don't mind. Yeah, and I'll start mainly from the first line there when it talks about scope. So when you really think about, is it leverageable? Well, is the scope the same? And in a lot of times what we'll see is the ISO scope can become very narrow to your advantage in many cases. So that's one of the first things is, are you comparing the same scope? And if you are, then yes, there will be a lot of and I guess if you're doing SOC 2 and you're trying to move it over to ISO, there will be a lot of controls that you can utilize for ISO. They may need some tweaking, but from a standards perspective, they do have their different elements. Chris, I'll let you really kind of jump in because you're the one that's running the team that's seeing the different environments.
Yeah, absolutely. And really back to that globalization, global diversification comment that I made earlier. We're seeing it both ways. Companies in the US who have a SOC 2, and it's like, hey, well, what does it take to get that ISO 27001 certificate? And the other way around, a company based in another country who maintains ISO, but not the SOC 2. And the overlap is the same regardless of which way you're going, but the important distinction is the lens that each of these are viewing their framework from. SOC 2 is more service focus, right? The specific services that organization is performing. And then it's really more of a controls-based assessment, right? What controls do you have in place to satisfy each of the criteria? ISO, the lens is purely from that information security management system, that ISMS, and it is that management system. So what is in place is sort of like a top-down view in order to manage risk within the business. So two different perspectives, but certainly once you get into the annex controls within ISO, that's where you're going to see that overlap. I mean, think HR life cycle. Oh, did we just lose Eric? Hopefully he hops back on. That HR life cycle, that's going to be the same, similar, overlap in each way between SOC 2 and ISO. I forget the initial handoff, Eric. What was the specific question there?
No, it's really, how the scope, does have a lot to do with this. Like you said, you don't like to use the word depends, but this is where, getting to have these discussions with our team, we try to dig as deep as we can to understand, what is the scope, either whether you're doing ISO, whether you're doing SOC 2, and some of the things you need to look at. Maybe it's some expansion of some controls, to get caught up to that other standard.
Well, and we would love for things to be universal, right? That would be easier for everyone. But the idea that, that it's just going to fit like a glove is not necessarily the case either, right? There's going to be some work, some differences. And I think having detailed, nuanced conversations with whoever it is that helps you with these type of projects is going to be key in understanding. But if someone just said, oh, you've done one, you can do the other one, no problem, easy peasy, that's probably not the answer either too. That's probably a little oversimplified, I would think.
Yeah, and Carlos, I think it's the next slide.
Yeah, we go to the next slide.
A bit about some of these estimates, because that's the big question we get.
Yeah.
Is, well, what percent is it? If I'm doing SOC 2 and I map it, and what are we looking at, right? There is a mapping from ISO versus SOC 2. The AICPA, who governs the SOC 2, has created this. And from what we've gathered and seen over time, is it could be, and I say could be because again, it's depending on your scope, approximately a 50 to 80% overlap. You think about the SOC 2, right? You've got different categories. You got security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, privacy. That's why that's why it's a range, because are you doing all five? Are you doing just security? What services are in scope for your ISO 27001? So there is quite a bit of a range depending on what elements you're looking at here.
Well, 2 points. I'm gonna ask Chris a question. One, I mean, 50% and 80% is quite a discrepancy. I mean, that could mean a lot of work, But my question, Chris, to you is, how much does it matter, like the timing of this work? Like if they are, or if they're going on at similar times or right after one another, or in two polar opposite, times of the year. I mean, how's that going to affect the level of effort?
Yeah, in this slide, I was interpreting it more from the perspective of I own a business, right, and I'm implementing ISO. I have a SOC 2 in place. What am I looking at, right? Yeah. In implementation side, yeah, 50-80%, that seems about right. But think about how the maturity of an organization. Have we been around? Do we base our policy procedures set on this standard, which we'll talk about in a moment? Or have we created just the bare bones policies that someone might need to implement a SOC 2 controls-based framework, right? So that's why that range is quite wide. From the audit perspective, to touch on where I believe your question is going, Carlos, if you line these two audits against these two standards up, there's certainly some things that can be leveraged from SOC 2 and ISO and vice versa, right? And more so when we get to a stage 2, which we'll talk about in a moment with an ISO audit. that's where we're digging in and looking to evidence certain controls to see if they're in place and operating as designed, right? And if those who are familiar with SOC 2, those words will sound very familiar. So that's where the overlap will be from an audit perspective. But again, that timing would be important to keep those as close as practical.
Makes sense to me. And then on the next one below, this kind of lines up with a question that we got through email. And he was asking, one, like, why even go for ISO 27001 when most of your business was in North America? And then he asked, would NIST, either 853 or 171, be a better fit? And I thought, Chris, you had a good response to that when we were in the green room. You want to take that one?
Yeah, and I won't say the word that we're not allowed to say, or the phrase, but really the driver from this is typically, right, service provider to service provider, B2B landscape. It's the demands of organizations that the target organization is doing business with. So what kind of requests are out there? Is it a contractual obligation? Is this more of a proactive sort of a compliance as a distinction effort? So all of those factors will come into play, and then it's that strategic decision. Well, which framework or frameworks is going to get us to where we want to be, and what's the smartest way to go about it? So complicated conversation, and one that we really love to have. Those are the conversations that are fun. It's not, do you do HR background screenings? We don't like asking those questions, but they're necessary. So really dependent upon an individual situation, and what the requirement set is from your current customer base, your prospective customer base. Are you intending to go through some high bar RFPs that are going to require these certain standards to be in place before you even get a seat at the table? Those are the types of questions that we talk through.
Yeah,
perfect.
Yeah, I always say know your audience today and try to estimate your audience tomorrow, because right, you could go, if healthcare is your audience, we may say HITRUST. If you're trying to go international, if you're selling even to manufacturing, even that, there's certain industries that are more receptive to ISO. And then, if it's strictly US, maybe it is SOC 2. But we do try to ask a lot of questions to put you on the right path.
Oh, that's great. I mean, compliance is all about a narrative, right? Like what story do you have to tell? And you can't do that if you're being reactionary. So I think that's a great approach. So let's go ahead and head on down to the next slide. I think we're really going to start, getting into, what does the audit look like? And so getting the scope correct. I think, Chris, we're just going to let you take this one as a starting point, and then maybe we can provide some questions or color along the way.
Yeah, and I'll let this sink in more, right, and continue to beat this point, but always begin with the end in mind, right? So what is that requirement that you're trying to satisfy? Maybe it's a future, maybe it's present. So having that information first is going to help navigate this. I think it's pretty complicated question as to what is the right scope, right? What area of the business should be included? What should be excluded? If we exclude something, is there any negative consequence to that, right? So it's about what is that target audience? What are they expecting to see? And if it's more of a proactive thing, what area of the business are you looking to highlight? So getting the scope correct from that perspective can save a lot of headache, I guess, later, and having to rescope something or reperform something or expand the scope. So again, begin with the end in mind is most important. Good thing about ISO, which I believe that we mentioned previously, is you can narrow that scope down to the individual business, even functional level, right? Say it was an ISO certificate only looking at the software development function. That's possible, right? So it's important to write that scope statement and determine at the end of the day, when that scope statement is what it's describing, will that be sufficient to satisfy the ask?
No, I think it's pretty clear. Eric, would you have anything to add to that, or do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just an example. I think it was, in fact, Chris and I, it's one of our common clients. They were an international client, locations all over the world. And they did exactly kind of what Chris was alluding to, of narrowing the scope down to the software development only. And you took an approximately 8,000 employee organization, multiple locations. And when we really started saying, well, the reader or the requester of this, what do they care about? And it was really about, do they have a good sound practice around their development, software development lifecycle? So when we started chopping away at that, we took 8,000 employees and narrowed it down to about 50 employees. So you can imagine what a difference that makes in the cost, the preparation, the execution. So that's why we really can't stress enough, really think hard about defining the right scope.
That makes sense. And from what I understand, I mean, the number of employees really do play a big part into what that final kind of number that gets spit out of the calculation calculator looks like. And it comes out in what we see as auditor days. I mean, that's kind of prescribed to some degree, isn't it, Chris? And the number of employees is a big part of what that prescription would be.
Yeah, and both thinking about implementing a program within an organization and then having to go through that audit. What Carlos is mentioning, there's a defined method for how auditor days it needs to be calculated. And ISO 27006 is where those rules live. So any certification body that's accredited will be following a similar pathway to determining level of effort, number of days, right? So, when you think about that example that Eric mentioned, where narrowing from thousands to, say, 50 employees, that's a big difference of level of effort. Think of the number of people that the auditor might need to talk to. And then on the implementation side, think about the level of effort is the same when you're talking about building out policies, procedures, right? But when you're putting that into operation, putting it into operation for 50 employees or 50,000 employees, you kind of get a sense of the scale there.
No, that's a good one. We have about 20 minutes left, so I just want to make sure that we get to move through the stage 1 and stage 2, and then also the surveillance audit. So let's work through that. Let's go to the getting the scope correct. Oh, is there anything here that you'd like to mention before we look to stage 1? Let's go ahead and go into the looking at what the internal audit, I guess, is probably what's next, I would imagine. So let's go and look at that. So. Eric, the last webinar we did, we spoke quite a bit about internal audit when we were talking about ISO. Do you want to kind of, start with this and let Chris add some color to that?
Yeah, and first you can see the first statement there. Yes, this is required. This is not optional. You have to complete an internal audit. In fact, for those of you who are looking to do this for your first time, we find that a lot of the organizations that we are speaking with, they're taken by surprise with this one. They're doing a lot of planning to get policies, procedures, documentation. They're trying hard to adhere to the standard, but they miss a key piece is, hey, you do need to schedule an internal audit. So it does need to be done at least once a year. And we say at least, it can be done multiple times. Very large organizations, it's an entire that just always feel like auditing. Who can do it? That's another question we get asked all the time. We get asked, well, can someone at our organization do it? The answer is yes, you can. We would normally find that large organizations have the bandwidth, the skill set to be able to do this. And they also have to avoid conflict of interest, right? So, a large organization a lot of times will have some of that separation. So most of the time, smaller organizations do end up outsourcing it because, one, they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the skill set, and they also are not able to avoid the conflict of interest. So, as we know, in a small organization, a lot of people wear multiple hats. So that's where that separation of duties really needs to happen during the internal audit function.
In the why, right? And I think this routes back to why certain organizations that we talk to are surprised by this requirement. Well, wait a minute, I'm not publicly traded. I'm not subject to SEC regulation. Internal audit, what are you talking about? And again, it's I think the message that even us as a certification body going through implementing our program, I mean, that's kind of a good thing. We're forced to drink our own medicine in this case. But with that internal audit and going through these, building out a program, don't overcomplicate things, right? Take a look, be thoughtful, map it to the scale of your organization, put something in place, and you can make improvements over time. That's the point, right? Management system. But this internal audit is important in demonstrating that management is monitoring that system and its operation, right? So this is the reason for the why. Why is this necessary?
Beautiful. That's great. Let's keep moving, and we can always touch back on these things if we can have time. But so stage one. So here we are. Internal audit's been done. The scoping's been done. We're ready to rock and roll. So, Chris, maybe just go ahead and tell us why stage one is even a thing. Like, why are we doing a stage one? What's the purpose for that?
Yeah, and a lot of it's just terminology, right? We're in ISO world, so this is the terminology. SOC world, we talk about type 1, type 2. Not necessarily mappable to stage 1, stage 2, but you'll see some similarities. With the stage 1, that's really the kick the tires, documentation review. Upon review, does that certification body feel that the organization is ready to move on toward that certification audit, which is the stage 2. So the clauses that are baked in the standard, just making sure that each of those are addressed. The scope statement, of course, that the scope of the audit is well defined and fair. Statement of applicability, certain other required documents and reports, that internal audit being one of them, to make sure that all those things that are just like deal breakers are in place and that the structure is there. And important to note, not necessarily that it's implementing and operating, but just that the structure is there in order to operate.
Is there room for making improvements between the stage 1 and the stage 2?
Yeah, oftentimes our clients will come out with some nonconformities. Hopefully they're not major, but they could be, where maybe you didn't define a risk treatment plan. Major nonconformity, you're not going to pass a stage 2 certification audit with that nonconformity if it persists. So oftentimes it's based on comfort of the organization being audited and their management style, their acceptance of a certain level of risk, right, for how quickly they want to schedule that stage 2. But important to note, they could be done back to back and go straight through documentation review onto the certification audit, just depending on preparedness.
Eric, what have you seen typically happen from just working with your clients over the years between the stage 1 and stage 2?
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things on that, and I'm going to jump back a little bit about the internal audit.
Sure.
Technically, the internal audit, if you think about the timeline, it could be done after a stage 1. It can be done before a stage 1. We normally like to see it completed before the stage 1, because it's giving one more, kind of readiness pass before us, the auditors, come in. And I think organizations will get a lot more value out of having the internal audit completed first. We then do the stage 1. And then because now you've had 2 passes, that we're normally able to get that stage 2 scheduled fairly quickly. It's just going to help reduce the amount of gaps or nonconformities that may be uncovered during the stage 1. For me, I normally recommend always budget about a 90-day window, at least budgeting from a timeline, right? Stage 1, budget 90 days in case there are some areas that you need to remediate. But we have had some that were really in good shape, and we were able to schedule within weeks after the stage 1.
Excellent. No, that's good. That's good stuff. Let's go ahead and then move over into the stage 2, because this is obviously where, a lot of work's going to be done. There's a little bit bigger projects and are going to hopefully lead to certification is the objective. So, Chris, you want to kind of talk us through that? We lost you.
Yeah, and just one follow-up point from the last,
of course,
the last slide, but just overall readiness of the organization, right? So internal audit, it's more of a make sure that the organization is ready to go through the audit before you're spending money. You could get through a stage 1 audit and a certification body could say, well, there's so many nonconformities, we need to schedule additional time. to review those remediations before we allow you to move forward. Because again, the certification body is the one issuing that certificate. So it is ultimately their decision to some degree. So again, internal audit, can't stress that enough. It's important.
Excellent.
Yeah. Well, good point, because the time is ticking. Once you completed the to stage 1, your time is ticking. So if you start with the internal audit, well, you haven't, in a sense, kicked off the clock, right? So when the auditor's done the stage 1, you are under a clock now to complete remediations and get your stage 2.
Makes sense.
Mitigating that audit risk, right? That's what we're talking about. So stage 2, this is the show me audit, right? We have the framework in place, the clauses, the statement of applicability. So for those controls that are applicable, show me that they are operating, right? The easy example is always HR. So show me your HR life cycle and show me those control points are implemented there. And I want to see the documentation for a couple recent new hires, however many there were. So stage 2 is going in, and you could say it has an operating effectiveness component to it, and it certainly does for the first stage 2, and then certainly for the surveillance audits, but not really mapping one-to-one to say a SOC 2 type 2, right? So we're not looking at a defined period of time. It's more the judgment of that auditor until they feel comfortable that a particular control is in place and operating.
When it comes time for certification, what does that process look like, and what should people expect from when they finish to when they actually get a certification?
Well, we can only speak for us, right? But our process, which I don't think is all that dissimilar, but who knows out in the wild. But the stage 2 audit would be wrapped up. There's a defined schedule, and a closing meeting is on the last day of that schedule, and that's where the lead auditor would list out any of the nonconformities that were noted. Some might not even raise to a level of a nonconformity and just be a request for additional information. And barring any major nonconformities, that's the word, right? The auditor would say, my recommendation is that you will achieve certification. That report is written up and sent to the certification body, certification decision committee, right? Who reviews the report and makes the decision to issue the certificate. So if that report is free from material error, we're likely getting a certificate.
Excellent. Good stuff. Anything else that you'd like to add, Eric, before we talk about the surveillance audits?
No, other than just when it comes to issuance of certificates, I always say, do some background research on the organization that you may be engaging, because we have found over the years certificates can be issued from non-accredited organizations. 360, we spent a lot of time, money, energy, going through ANAB. And, that's one of the, kind of I would say one of the top leaders, at least in monitoring and the whole process. So that's one of the things I would say is just, do some homework and make sure that the organization you're working with is properly accredited.
And you can look those up, right? I mean, there's places to find
absolutely.
out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I liken that to, would you go to a university that wasn't accredited, right? When you get that degree, you want it to mean something. So important to know that. And the accrediting bodies, there's a few of them, but ANAB or ANAB is what they prefer to be called. But you can go on their website, and the list of all of the certification bodies that are accredited with them are listed there.
Excellent. Good advice. I forgot all about that. I think that's really important for people to know. All right, let's go down and let's just wrap this thing up, or as we get close to it, with the surveillance audits. I mean, what's the purpose of the surveillance audit? They're, when I see them come out, and Eric too, from a level of effort standpoint and dollar amount standpoint, they're always smaller. So I assume that they're just kind of checkups. But what is that? What is this thing, Chris? Why is it in this process?
Yep. So important to know with an ISO certificate, it's a 3-year cycle, right? That issuance date and an expiration date is 3 years apart from one another. With that, there's a monitoring component. And again, it's from the CB, the certification body's perspective. I need to go out and monitor that organization to ensure that they're still maintaining their ISO program, whatever standard they have implemented. So with these surveillance audits, so basically a 1/3 level of effort from what was experienced from the initial certification audit. So both at stage 1, stage 2. And it's designed to go through on certain areas, again, about 1/3 of those areas, to ensure that there's no material issues, any changes from the initial certification audit that would need to be considered. And again, just to ensure that the function of that program is still there.
Makes complete sense. I do have a question that someone asked, and I think this is a good time to bring it up. They said during this 3-year period that you described, if there are architectural changes, what governs the need to completely, redo the ISO certification, and then follow that up by saying what types of changes will prompt a full audit again? So same question, but maybe a little bit shorter way of saying it. But how would you answer something like that, Chris?
Not the buzzword, the buzz phrase. It would matter how significant of a change, right? So, and really it's, again, the certification body is holding that certificate. It's their decision to apply judgment, and the scope and nature of that change, what controls specifically were any controls impacted? Is it a like tool for a like tool being swapped out and there really isn't any interruption? That's up to the discretion of that certification body. But let's just say that change was tied to a certain subset of controls. It could be that the certification body would want to perform a half audit day to review that, to ensure that everything has been implemented on that new scope change, whatever it may be, to the degree that they're expecting.
Well, hopefully this person has someone they can ask, and they've asked us, but whoever it is that's helping them along the way, that'd be a good.
We need more information.
Yeah. We need more information. Hopefully they will either contact us or work with whoever it is that's helping them with their audit, because you should let people know if that's happening, I would imagine. Eric, as we start to kind of wrap this thing up, I mean, you've been, along, on our ISO journey as a company. I mean, do you have any thing that you'd like to leave folks with as they're thinking about, this as a standard or a certification?
Other than the fact I just see it really is growing. Not only with our firm, but we saw the statistics today that really backed up some of the questions we even had. Where are we spending our time, money, and energy? Right now, ISO is really on the rise. And one of the things that you were just talking about, about say significant, or maybe it's a significant change in your environment, how it's going to affect your next audit. It's not only applying to ISO, right? Whether it's SOC 2, PCI, HITRUST, any of these programs, this is where communication, you should have a very wide open communication channel with your auditor. And we are never one that wants to be the kind of gotcha, mentality. We always encourage, free communication back and forth. Tell us what may change, because there may be certain things that we can do to help, do some interim testing to where it doesn't have a major impact on your next audit. So these are just things we always encourage, just good communication.
That's an excellent point to leave folks with. Okay, well, let's just kind of start to wrap things up, give people a few minutes back in their day. I would say that be looking for email communication from us again, asking how we did, and if you want the recording, we'll be sending that out as well. And come visit with us next month and talk about HITRUST, and share with folks, your colleagues, that this is going on. We really want to, help educate and put this information out there for folks. And until then, we'll be signing off. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate it.